Hey there! Welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today's a big one, the newest project from 21 Pilots, Breach. I'm struggling to figure out why I wasn't as excited about this album as I was for Clancy last year, or really any 21 Pilots album the past decade. Maybe it's how I was considerably less impressed in the long term with Clancy than most, which on the one hand felt like vindication for all the themes and metatext I'd been unpacking compared to the thoroughly over-designed lore going back for a while, especially during Scaled and Icy in 2021, which I'll still argue is criminally underrated. But on the other hand, Clancy had the feel of be careful what you wish for, not only in its direct textual critique of nostalgia, but also a return to trenched textures while trying to keep the pop structures, which led to a wonky incongruency, especially in the production, that never fully worked. But the duo also knew that Clancy was ending on something close to a cliffhanger in the lore, a final conflict with Nico/Blurryface where there was no resolution, and you can tell they were a little guilty for pulling that bait and switch, so naturally Breach would finish that story. Right? Well, I'm of a few minds on this, because thematically, Breach does conclude the lore of this segment of 21 Pilots, which I will be spoiling here, you've been warned. On the other hand, I couldn't escape the lingering thought that Breach only exists because Clancy refused to end properly, and hence it might just feel like an extended victory lap of fan service. That's certainly what some of the production, the callbacks, and the pile-up of Easter eggs are trying to evoke, except for the message at its core and the themes, which directly follows on from Clancy, and the project becomes less Avengers Endgame, more a decidedly revealing statement of meta-commentary that's none too flattering to anyone involved. Oh, and there's also an album here somewhere too, and if that sounds kind of perfunctory, welcome to the frustrating experience of trying to digest this album, and naturally it's going to take us to the last olive branch I extended to the click just over a year ago. I'll try one more time, where on some level, this is giving you parts of what you wanted, especially if you felt shortchanged by the lore largely feeling perfunctory to bookend Clancy. Now, it's still very much the same with that here, again, evidence that it's always been more about the trappings around the meta-commentary, but across the album, there are more callbacks that would register for the longtime diehards, stacking up the echoes to previous projects and snippets or samples or embellishments that feel of a previous era. Oh look, Downstairs reworks an unreleased cut from Regional at Best from pre-Fuel by Ramen. City Walls and Intentions have echoes going back to Vessel. It feels like the sort of culmination that when you add in the expense of the music video for City Walls, had me start wondering if this was the duo finally hanging it up, going out in a bang. Now, full disclosure, I didn't fully get on board until Vessel. I just don't think those early pre-Fuel by Ramen projects have the compositional or production refinement to hold up. So while I clocked the references, they didn't have the same emotional weight for me. But if I look at all the praise I've given to Marianas Trench over the past decade, especially for an album and thematic arc that refuses to end properly, I do get the emotional resonance. I'm willing to meet you there. Of course, all this would be helped if the production wasn't doubling down on a lot of the washed out grayscale tones courtesy of Paul Maney. It was nice to see Mike Elizondo show up to punch up the driving pianos of garbage, if the lyrics didn't feel so painfully rote and basic in the angst, as well as the extensive reinterpolation of My Soft Spots, My Robots from Blanket Approval on Robot Voices, which has a pretty good throwback post-punk revival guitar line that's then smothered in gauzy bleeps, auto-tune crooning, and a low end that's more gurgle than actual groove. Days Lie Dormant is quite frankly the better version of this kind of song, even if the attempted bombastic climax in the vocal line reminds me way too much of AJR in the wrong way. But you know, speaking of AJR, one of their biggest issues was not knowing when to stop arranging their mix for overcluttered bombast, and it's a little alarming to now see just how often 21 Pilots falls falls into that exact same trap across Breach. In order to make up for how the album's thematic arc seems to be scrabbling to fill time, we'll get to it, the mixes are increasingly stuffed with too many ideas and no real curation. Initially, the keyboard choices didn't feel quite as incongruous and distracting as on Clancy, with the exception of lead-off single The Contract, when between the drum and bass percussion and the shrill keys and the contorted vocal processing, it actually kinda nails the paranoid cacophony. I liked it a lot more than I thought I would, given how it's all doing way too much. But those synths are always poking through. They're distracting, like on the post-chorus of City Walls, which really could have afforded to truly go for broke with more muscle off the gnarled bass line, or the oily goop smothering what could have been a proper Rager on drum show, or that truly awful synth tone across Cottonwood that doesn't fit the more organic production, or the overmixed pileup of Tally that sounds like it's trying to recreate a hyper-caffeinated Porter Robinson drop and doing it badly. And once again, in subsuming to the washed-out, turgid tones that suffocate any brighter melody, alongside the usual vocal overcompression which can feel glaringly out of place. Looking at Cottonwood again, it hits that same weird miasma that's never fully clicked coming off of Trench, like how mewling and sickly the lead vocal line and synth is around the bass, and the eye-rolling Empty Uzis line on RAWFEAR, which completely wastes some of the tempo shifts and screaming. It somehow only gets worse in the oily mess of One Way, which sounds like a horrid Glass Animals leftover and might be among the worst songs that 21 Pilots has ever made, or the tepid, watery pianos around Center Mass, or how the buzzy stutter of Downstairs is trying to build some dramatic power off the pianos and falsetto and the dubstep-esque synth, and it roils down to one of the most poorly executed key change I have heard this year midway into that final hook, at least until One Way has a key change too, and somehow it's even worse. Look, I went back to both Blurryface and Scaled and Icy, and given both actually give their hooks some room to breathe, their melodies allowing them to pop, even if the production sounds chintzy, those melodies wind up way stickier, with considerably stronger dynamic range. I remember more of those hooks. But let's get back to those lyrics and themes, because if you were waiting for the confrontation post-Clancy to give you any kind of victory, you're about to be rudely disappointed. Again, spoilers ahead, you've been warned, but Clancy, played by Tyler Joseph, becomes the next Blurryface and assimilates all of the banditos into his new ranks of bishops, leaving the Torchbearer, played by the drummer Josh Dunn, as frustrated and confused as he departs, now out to find the next Clancy as the whole cycle begins anew. Now, this would not be a surprise if you heard the last album, paying attention to the fine details. It's not surprising that the struggle to heal and grow will have moments of backsliding and failure, that you can't be forever running from your demons, but that facing them straight on is by no means guaranteed, especially when you feel like you've got even less in the tank than before. It's not pass nor fail, but a poisonous progression. Sometimes at the end, you wind up becoming what you once may have despised. And it also doesn't surprise me that the banditos, representative of the clique and the fan base, are now, in a twisted way, his new dark enablers. That was already implied given how they pulled him back into the story at the end of Scaled and Icy. The meta commentary of them being the new industry when 21 Pilots feels too big to fail, that's pretty apt. But the execution of it all, it hits a sour note for me, and it just does not stop. Put aside how it's a complete fake out on any climax, I guess we can accept that. It just shrinks into its own fear and depression, finding comfort in getting smaller, feeling less, finding comfort in the robots, his ambition being utterly crushed down by the system. No! Even if they're being self-aware and defeatist about the downward spiral, I don't buy it. Do not give me the horse manure that 21 Pilots feels like the system is quashing their ambitions, when for damn near a decade in rock, they have been the system. And make no mistake, I think they know that too. For multiple albums now, you can tell how much the weight of all of that industry pressure is hammering down on them when they'd rather be home with family than running up the score on the charts, playing the game, where Tyler Joseph has never sounded so inert on the microphone, especially given the loss of his grandfather, where he's clearly grieving and he describes it on Cottonwood, and how much he misses his wife on Days Lie Dormant. A lot of this subtext was on Clancy too, but the negative reception to Scaled and Icy also exposed just how creative their audience will allow them to be. So the arc that should have concluded with Clancy is drawn out into a second project full of callbacks and fan service and Easter eggs, with an utterly miserable ending where they can never properly heal and break the cycle. But I don't know, maybe you can try, be better, presuming you're not so disappointed yourself. And even then, at the end of the City Walls video, it's implied they just might keep on hunting for the next Clancy. And it's so cynical and corporate, it kills any of my desire to hear more. 21 Pilots, you're not the underdog. You franchised your own insecurity. And while I thought that the lore was getting tired before, here it's just dead, shelved to be reanimated by the necromancers on the contract if they might need it going forward. You never know. And you know what? I don't get inspiration from that. When I reviewed Clancy, I drew the parallel to Eminem's reflexive relationship with fame in the audience that he created, where the death of Slim Shady later that year proved the stark, ugly limits of that circular meta-commentary, the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail. But at least I got the impression Eminem understood the weight of legacy, how he had to try to change, try to push open a new door instead of constantly going back to the well. Taylor Swift also understood that in the Tortured Poets department. Not that anyone gave her credit for it, for some pretty keen self-aware analysis, especially as a woman aging in the music industry. Her time's not guaranteed. Whereas for 21 Pilots, I hear the duo exhausted, currently out of good ideas, who have cracked the formula enough to serve the base, pun intended, but also seem like they're tying up loose ends. Wrap this shit up, because they'd rather be doing anything else. One thing I liked about Clancy was that despite the backsliding in the themes, there were nuggets of hope. That even if they felt grim, they could handle it all a little better. Chill out, man. We're right on time. Breach, meanwhile, slaps that hope out of your hands and spits on it, attempting to ramp up the special effects budget for a dramatic conclusion that feels gutless, hollow, and trapped. There's always been this strong fatalistic note across 21 Pilots' catalog. It's why the albums have felt so recursive, never fully getting out or healing, which can be realistic to the emotional experience of this mental hell. I want to be sympathetic, but when you pair it with what is on the album, the B-side leftovers, the phoned-in dregs of Clancy, because why not when the fans keep on buying it? It feels far more mercenary than any pop pivot they've ever done. And I don't like to speculate on the future of bands, but when Tyler Joseph is openly questioning doing any more tours after this, it wouldn't surprise me if they took a long break, at best. But for Breach, comfortably their worst album. The production's a mess, the lyrics feel rote and uninspired. Rarely has a song like Garbage felt like such apropos meta-commentary. If you're not a fan, they've done better already, and if you are, you can't escape this ugliness. A weird contempt for not letting them evolve artistically, but also drawing out the process, teasing those fans years past the expiration date because the insecurity prevents another big risk. And what's sad here is that everything I'm saying, 21 Pilots already knows. And I already burned my most pithy repeated line last year when JPEG Mafia made his own self-immolation. I'm gonna skip it for now. Maybe for everyone's sake, it'll actually break the cycle. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. Yeah, if this comes across more disappointed and angry, that's intentional. This was a real letdown for a project. I did not expect to have this much to say, but again, when 21 Pilots made their version of Mania thematically and kind of sonically, I gotta call it like I see it. But hey, comments down there, have fun. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If y'all want to get albums on my schedule or help support the channel or yell at me on my Discord, link to my Patreon and YouTube memberships right over there. Don't feel obligated. Real tough times out of there. I understand. The option's available. Till then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.